Real pleasure to be with you tonight, and I also want to say hello to the folks who are joining us on webcast and who are joining us in Second Life. Some of you might not know the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation. We're that foundation that gives out Genius Awards every September. That's us. We're also the foundation in the morning. If you're listening to National Public Radio, sometimes you'll hear that voice that says, supported by the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation. That's us. But we do a lot more than that. We actually give out approximately $240 million annually in grants. We give out across 65 countries in areas that range from peace and security to international human rights to affordable housing and community development. But since our inception, we have always been deeply committed to public education. And 4 years ago, after 26 years of very significant funding and support of schools and school districts around the country, and realizing that we hadn't quite made the kind of progress that we had hoped for, we made a fairly significant shift in our approach to supporting public education. It was a kind of shift where we shifted from focusing on education, which happens in specific kinds of buildings, to a shift towards learning, which can happen anywhere at any time. We made a shift from focusing on how and what kinds of information students consume to focusing on how they participate in learning and how they produce and the kinds of things they make. We made a shift from focusing on institutions to focusing on the learner, to focusing on the kids and how they engage. And in some ways, these might not sound like significant shifts, but they were huge for us. They were so huge, in fact, and part of what we learned from the shifts was that we really had to begin to focus and to understand how young people are learning outside of school, and how they're beginning to socialize, and how they engage civically. And we began to learn almost immediately that there's a huge role that digital media plays in their learning outside of school. By digital media, I'm referring to games, social networks, mobile devices, and the web more generally. And the shift for us was so significant that we ended up launching an $85 million initiative in digital media and learning. And that we think that we're at a moment where there's an extraordinary opportunity to transform learning in the United States. Now, I say all that as an introduction to today's conversation, but I should also admit that I'm a mom, and that I also, prior to joining MacArthur, was a tenured professor at a school of education where I taught pre-service courses. And that despite the fact that I spend my entire day now, my work day, immersed in digital media and learning, I still can't help but wonder what the heck it is my boys are doing in their free time. And I still worry as I watch my little 7-year-old in his free time. I still worry about his reading and his writing, as he just gleefully jumps from creature to creature and planet to planet in his new most favorite game, Spore. And I wonder if I'm doing the right thing when I yell at my 10-year-old to turn off that music as I hear the somewhat obscene language coming from the hip-hop music that he's remixing. I wonder what my role is as a parent, as an educator. And I think that in this new world of digital media creation and participation, the role of the parent, the role of the educator, the role of the adult more generally is shifting. And it's still not defined. And in many respects, it still depends on how we understand what it is that's being learned in these contexts. And so we think these kinds of questions and these topics are important and worthy of public discussion. And so at MacArthur, we've decided to put together a series of public forum in the hopes that we can start having more public discussions about what learning looks like in the digital age, and that we can have an opportunity to have public discussions about our concerns about what is the role of the adult, and what is it that our kids are learning when they're making digital productions. And so our hope for tonight is a simple one. We wanted to share with you some of the things we've been learning from our grant making. We wanted to bring together 3 of our most esteemed colleagues to share with you some of the great work they've been doing. And as importantly, we want to open it up tonight for your questions and for your comments and your thoughts so that we can have a general discussion. And so with that as an introduction, I'd like to invite our panelists up to begin the discussion tonight, and hopefully we'll have a great conversation. So let me introduce Elyse Eidman-Aadahl. I knew I'd mess up her name. I do that every time. Elyse directs the national programs and site development for the National Writing Project, where she has the opportunity to work with educators across the country who are working to improve the teaching of writing and learning in their schools and communities. Based at the University of California, Berkeley, the National Writing Project operates as a network of over 200 university-based local writing project sites, including the Philadelphia Writing Project, based at the University of Pennsylvania. Hello, Elyse. Nichole Pinkard is a professor at DePaul University in Chicago. She's the founder of the after-school program Digital Youth Network, the co-founder of a new youth program in the Chicago Public Library, UMedia, and has also led efforts to implement one-to-one computing in urban schools, integrate digital media into core instruction. Dr. Pinkard is a recipient of the Jan Hawkins Award for early career contributions to humanistic research and scholarships in learning technologies and an NSF Early Career Fellowship. Welcome, Nichole. And Renee Hobbs is from here in Philadelphia, is a professor in the Department of Broadcasting, Telecommunications, and Mass Media at Temple University School of Communications and Theater, where she founded the Media Education Lab. Welcome, Renee.
She has a home court advantage, right?
So Elyse, why don't we jump right in? You are the director of a program that involves over 200 sites and 90,000 teachers. As you know, youth empowerment is not something new, nor media productions. So tell us a little bit about what you think is so special about this moment.
Okay. Thank you, Connie. And in fact, in addition to youth voice not being new and making media not being new, it's also not new to think that there's a challenge in parenting and wondering what's going on.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that.
Absolutely. That, in fact, is not new. So part of what I think we want to share is that there is something really profound and really new that does make us call, I think, some questions to the fore together. Parents, teachers, and young people themselves. Just to kind of put a fine point on it, let's look at one slide, I think. Look forward. Now, here is an example of media change. Over centuries, the way we've made media, which has often involved something to make a mark with and something to make a mark on. And over a couple of centuries, you can see there's innovation from one thing to another in the things we make marks with and the things we make marks on. So it's not like there hasn't ever been change in media. But the change you see up there is dramatically different from the change in the next slide. From that typewriter, which there'll be people in the room who will remember, right? There'll be people in the room who won't remember. And if you don't remember, ask somebody what a dramatic thing it was when the IBM Selectric was invented, and some people will tell you that story. From that, which is a thing that makes a mark on something, to number two, a computer. That computer doesn't make a mark on something. That computer creates digital media that can be mixed and remixed, that can be translated over, transferred over wires, it can be multiply reproduced in a million different contexts. And then the third slide there, or the third picture, that same computer now hooked to the internet and able to accept a range of devices that can put in audio, that can put in video, and all of it put together and shared over that internet. The change in our lifetimes from that first to that last picture is more dramatic than the changes over centuries before. Next slide. Here's three things that have come together right now that make this an incredibly profound moment. Number one. Now, some of you know plenty of these icons. These icons, whether it's a piece of software on a computer or whether it's something on the web, these are tools that allow us to be media makers with an amazingly low barrier of entry. What previously somebody did in a studio with huge investment of capital and tremendous expertise, now actually that making can be in the hands of virtually anybody. Trend number two. another low barrier of entry trend. So over time, these things called computers have simply gotten more portable, more powerful, and cheaper in cost, and all connected to the internet. Low barrier of entry. Next one. Put them on the internet. Let's talk for a minute about the developments in the internet itself in the last couple of years. The internet, which connects one computer to another, like when one computer connects and sends an email to another, actually has developed to become first a one-to-one point. Next slide, one-to-many, one website read by a million computers, all looking at one website. But now, what people will talk about as, next slide, many-to-many. In the many-to-many ecology for computers, what we know is anybody could be publishing from any of those points to any other point. So what we really have, as the next slide's going to show, is a web of interactions among people who can all be media creators, publishers, actually globally. And that is new. Low barrier of entry and worldwide reach. Now, something to think about, next slide, as people take this up, because actually it's easy to do, we really have the possibility of a kind of dramatic scale of authorship like never before, because the tools and the media of circulation has shifted. This is kind of a look at projected, if we treat Facebook, Twitter, et cetera, bloggers, if we treat them as authors, and why shouldn't we? We could have potentially something that could be thought of as universal authorship. And I love this quote. Nearly universal literacy, a defining characteristic of today's modern civilization. Nearly universal authorship will shape tomorrow's. The potential is there. So if we look, next slide, if we picture the young people who are actually not even going to follow this drift, but are born into a culture where this ecology, for the shift of information, for the potential for media creation and publishing, that is simply there. They are simply born into it. So see in the next slide, all these pictures, by the way, are taken from families posting on Flickr. This is not like staged to make a point. These are people capturing today's youngest citizens with those same tools, the potential of universal authorship. Now that potential is not realized. And in fact, you could argue that the potential for universal literacy, which was described as the defining characteristic of modern civilization, is not yet realized. Potential, how will we realize it? So we'd like to just think, last slide, the questions that it raises for us as adults now. If we are in fact sitting on a moment with such incredible, epic shifting potential in the culture of information, media creation, the notion that in fact we really can all be connected to each other as active publishing creating agents. What are the questions that it should raise for us that we need to take up together as a society so that the potential, in fact, this moment of potential could be captured and realize something?
Well, I want to pick up from where you left off and to go back to the word potential. I think what we have learned, if we look at our own history of teaching literacy to kids, is that potential doesn't mean that everyone's going to realize it, and that unless we're intentional about the creation of learning opportunities for all youth to become literate in the use of these digital literacies, that we're going to end up with another gap, and many are calling this the participation gap. Henry Jenkins talks a lot about this. And I think one of the other things we can take from the work on making kids literate in traditional forms is that in today's race to create kids, make kids all digitally literate, we can't assume that the purview, that the responsibility is all in the responsibility of the schools. And we have to think about what are those ecologies, those learning ecologies that integrate the home, the school, the after school into one big learning opportunity for kids. And so over the past 5 years, we've been trying to do just that. Instead of focusing our work in the school, we focused our work on kids. And we've decided to build learning opportunities for them as they move. So we started off with after-school programs to teach kids digital media. And then after we got enough kids, in a particular school engaged with the technology that piqued the interest of the school, the teachers, we then moved to creating media arts programs in the school. From there, we said, wait a second, all the kids have access to laptops at home as part of the school. We need to create a social network so the kids can connect to one another and also connect to their mentors and teachers along the way. So I think it's important to, as we all go on this journey, to figure out how do we develop digital literacies in kids to not be space-centered, but to focus in on learning and follow the kids where they may go. And that has taken us into a new partnership with the Chicago Public Libraries, into a space called UMedia, which is a teen-only space in the library where high school kids, this is important, high school kids want to go to the library after school to hang out with each other, to check out books, to learn and develop their digital media literacies, and to sort of, as in their term, to geek out. And what we've discovered is that if you combine spaces, the right design spaces with access to mentors who can help kids develop in the skill sets that they want, then kids are willing to tackle hard projects and willing to even engage traditional literacy. So I want to show you an example of a project that we worked on with our kids. The first project we did with the library was to tackle the book House on Mango Street. And so we worked with 50 kids across 35 different schools. And these are not the top kids. We had some kids with IEPs. These are kids from a variety of different ranges. And what we asked them to do was to first read the book. Let's discuss the book. And then how would you remix the book to make it relate to your reality? And so I want to show you two examples. The first, can you go back to the image of the house? This is just a quick example where a teen took a camera, went into their neighborhood and said, well, what does my neighborhood look like? And then they remixed one of the chapters for the book, if you're familiar with it, A House of My Own, and they're writing about what is their house. So this is actually a project created by a kid with an IEP. Can you go to this?
What's an IEP?
Individual education program. So this student had some limitations around literacy. The second, what I'm going to show you is a video, and this is a video where a young lady read the book and took 3 characters from the book and created her own image of what the struggles those characters were going through. You can play it. Thank you. So that's just an example of grappling with really the issues that the book raised. So I want to leave with 5 core principles I think we've learned from doing this work. One is the importance of rethinking our definition of who are teachers, and that in order to do this work, we had to bring in new media artists into the school and to build relationships between them and the teachers such that the schools view them as teachers, the libraries view them as teachers, and students view them as teachers. Because I think we can no longer expect that traditional teachers are going to be the ones who have to teach kids all these particular literacies. Second is the importance of creating bridges between all the spaces where kids spend their time. What we do know, and a lot of the literature shows us, kids are spending a lot of time outside of school developing literacies, but they feel a disconnect from school. And so we have to really work on creating those bridges that allow them to bring that skill set in. The third is the importance of showcases, opportunities for students to present their work. We've experienced that when kids have opportunities to show their work to others and they know that they have real audiences, they'll they'll iterate, they'll put in the effort, they'll do it over and over and over again, because it's important to them how they're perceived and how others take their work. And finally, is the importance of creating clear pathways that make visible to youth all the identities that they can develop in relationship to new media, and also what are the activities they can do to get there. And this is a lesson we've taken from games. The thing about playing video games is that it's very clear if you're what you have to do to get to the next level, and the feedback is given to you if you succeeded or failed. So those are 5 principles that we've learned.
And those principles seem to me apply in a range of settings, both in school and out of school. Today I want to talk a little bit about answering that question, what kids learn when they create with digital media, because really we don't know yet. This whole area is still so much in its infancy, and the research in the field is certainly in its infancy. But here in Philadelphia, we have a vibrant youth media and media literacy community, not only in the 31 high schools who offer communication arts programs, but in a rich array of after-school programs in youth media that offer kids opportunities for media composition practices on a range of different kinds of media, including images, including web, including games, including video, and more. So let's take a look at some of the friends in Philadelphia who are exploring what media literacy looks like and what youth media looks like in the context of their programs. First up, the Mural Arts Youth Media Program, really looking at creating kids thinking about themselves in relation to social responsibility and speaking to the issues in their community and connecting that to some aesthetic principles around the visual arts. What's up next? The Philadelphia Student Union. Woohoo! And not only do you have this way cool podcast, but what's next there on the list? There's your cool YouTube and video websites. And what's up next after the Philadelphia Student Union? The Big Picture Alliance. Wonderful program that brings filmmakers and young people into making narratives, powerful narratives about their lived experience in this community. And up next is our friends, hey, that's me, the Media Education Lab. Whoa. We're working in the Russell Byers Charter School, looking at how to introduce these concepts to kids starting in age 5, actually starting at age 4, and exploring what that looks like, giving 4-year-olds cameras and having them tell their stories. What's up after that? Well, there's those lots and lots of videos that our kids made this summer in a summer enrichment program. After that, we have our legendary media arts program, Scribe, really a pioneer in the field of media arts, the documentary history project for youth, probably one of the most distinguished programs in the country, giving teenagers the opportunity to reflect on documentary genre by working on a project of relevance to this community. We also have some initiative from the state of Pennsylvania, a project called the Media Straight Up, where state of Pennsylvania offers ways to do critical thinking and media production around radio. An interesting thing, actually involving the National Guard, if you can believe it. What's up after that? Youth Empowerment Service, yes, Philly, up in North Philly, with their digital media arts program. And then we also have, what's up after that? The Temple Youth Voices Project, really interesting project run by my colleague Barbara Furman, bringing college students and high school students together to address issues related to their neighborhoods and using the power of youth media to do some social advocacy. What else do we have? The WHYY Learning Lab. They broke ground on a new building this spring. It's a really exciting initiative. We're really glad to see the partnership from the public broadcasting community. What else do we have? The Village of Arts and Humanities, another very distinguished program offering a range of dynamic arts education programs to young people in their digital media program. Very exciting. Our Temple students learn a lot by working with kids at the Village, and that's in a way where that kind of partnership is very powerful for connecting our communities. We also have the Project Home, the Honickman Learning Center, really big investment and one that really is bringing some digital media programs to young people. What else? Well, there's some more of the Honickman Learning Center, and what else? Brown Partners, what a fascinating project. Advertising guy says kids need to learn about advertising, they need to think critically about advertising, and they need to understand about issues of representation in advertising. So let's have kids develop ad campaigns using multimedia and help them understand how advertising works. What an exciting innovation, and coming from the business community. So that's a really cool project. What else? Well, there's HopeWorks across the river in Camden, and for the last slide, there's out in the suburbs, the Bryn Mawr Film Institute that brings third graders in for a visual literacy program doing media production and critical analysis of film. And finally, we're really pleased that all those folks and many more, and if you want to know who those are, there's a list of the 15 or so that I just talked about. And there's copies of that at the back. If you take a look at the last slide, just this fall, this group got together to create the Philadelphia Youth Media Collaborative. That's a leadership group really trying to cultivate the visibility of youth media programs in the city. So all of that means that there's a lot of energy in Philadelphia for youth media and a lot of innovation and a lot of people trying to figure out what it looks like, because there is no one size fits all. Even though there are some principles that do connect across, it is absolutely the case that this work has to happen in relationship to the context and the community. That being said, what students learn when they create with digital media, which is kind of why we're here, depends on how it's taught. And so as we look around all those programs, what's learned when kids create with digital media depends on how it's taught. So in those programs, we see that depending on how it's taught, digital media can help kids learn skills of civic advocacy. It can help them learn vocational skills that are useful for getting a job. It can develop their ability to use traditional print literacies and, more fundamentally, the principles of rhetoric to become effective communicators. But it also can help kids to be really, really good at creating or imitating the best and worst of what kids experience in popular culture and mass media. So what kids learn from digital media depends on how it's taught. And one thing for sure that unites a lot of work in this area is concern about three general big clusters of ideas. One has to do with understanding the relationship between authors and audiences. As authors and audiences are we're all becoming authors and we're all becoming audiences, one of the things we're starting to understand is just because we have universal authorship doesn't mean we're looking at and responding to and making sense of each other's creative work. And so we have to think about being an author and being a reader, right? Being a viewer, being a listener, being an audience as fundamentally related, and need to deepen the skills and capacities in both those areas, authorship and in consumption or viewership or readership. And we need to think about the ethical and social responsibilities that are part of our obligations as authors. So for instance, the work we did, thanks to the MacArthur Foundation, on looking at how to explore issues of copyright and intellectual property, those become really important in terms of thinking about our ethical relationship to the work we produce and to the way in which sharing is so fundamental to the creative process. The second big set of ideas that youth media programs and youth media learning have to explore and emphasize is the way in which messages and meaning circulate. And those folks associated with the National Writing Project know well the way in which our understanding and our interpretations of messages come from our prior experience, come from our background knowledge, come from our lived experience with the world, and that when we encounter a media text, we don't make the same meaning of it because we actually use our own selves in the meaning construction process. And for people to think carefully and critically about that, and for them to understand how a message design and format and content shape the way messages circulate in our culture. And finally, and maybe most importantly, what kids learn when they create with digital media is about the relationship between media texts and the reality, the social and cultural and political and economic reality that's all around them. Because texts are representations, and they derive their power from the fact that they speak to and speak about the world. So understanding the relationship between media texts as representations and the complex world that we live in is one of those understandings that can deepen our appreciation for the power of media, but also for our sense of obligation, our sense of responsibility as both authors and as audiences.
Thank you for that. That's been a terrific start for the panel. I have some questions of my own that I want to kickstart the conversation with, but I also want to alert you that we'll be turning it over to you all for your questions very shortly, so I'm expecting you to start raising your hands and getting the conversation going. And that goes for the webcast folks as well. But as we start talking about the power of the web, both for young people to have their voices out there and to speak to, as citizens, to the world, and you've spoken about the low barrier for both production and for distribution and ethical responsibility. Can we cycle back to this question of the role of the adult and the educator and what it means to take someone who is growing up in this world and is producing and distributing from the beginning, and how do we help them to understand what's worthy of distribution, what's not, and how to think about ethically their role? And I'll ask that of any of you.
Well, I think one thing, I would link this issue of the role of the adult to some of this transformation in a different way. Before we had such simple and powerful mechanisms for participation that these tools give us, we could almost think that it was possible to do something like, have the role of the adult be to certify legitimacy first, like you'll spend a few years in school, maybe you'll pass these tests, maybe then you'll actually have the opportunity to produce something for an editor, maybe then an editor will decide it can be published. So at a range of places, we've got really powerful adults as gatekeepers in some ways for the flow of information. That's not possible now. It is in fact the case that anybody, adults and young people together, can go around all of those mechanisms. That's what these tools have done. So to some degree, we have no choice but to actually ourselves also participate in that media culture, come to understand it, and try to bring the kind of lens that we can bring as a more mature, experienced reader of the social situation, critical understanding of how people relate to each other, ethical questions, et cetera, that we can bring through a lens as an adult into conversations with young people. Because we can't actually solve this dilemma by keeping them out of this ecology. They're already in it. So we do have to figure out how to be mentors and colleagues and learners ourselves. It's fast changing. The norms and ethics in many of these environments, especially social networking environments, are developing new norms for communication all the time.
But
We need to be in there.
But because the new norms are developing very fast, one of the ways adults have understood their role is to say, oh, the kids know more than me, and oh, this is like, they're very savvy and I'm really not, so I better just like step back. And a lot of parents are feeling increasingly disempowered because they feel so out of the loop that they don't feel that they can insert themselves into helping kids ask critical questions about what they're doing and why, helping keep a balance of living life online and then living in the world, what we would call the flesh and blood world, keeping the balance, right? So I think sometimes this issue of our sense that things are changing so fast that adults don't feel empowered to play a role is one of the dangers that we have to address and invite parents to say, and parents and teachers to say, look, you don't have to know everything. You don't have to be an expert, right? And if you think you can't participate in this conversation, you can't be influential in the lives of your students and your children until you are an expert, we're going to have to wait a long, long time. So, but you do have a set of skills that are really valuable, right? And those are the skills and the knowledge that parents and teachers can activate. That's the appropriate role for adults.
I want to add something. Oftentimes when we think about the role of adults or parents, we're thinking about an individual kid's parents. But one of the things we've seen in the work of Mimi Ito and looking at interest-driven networks where kids are going online to learn, often in those spaces, kids are engaged in being taught by adults that they don't personally know. many of our kids are learning how to do things with anime music videos or robotics and gaming online in interaction with adults. So there's two types. There's the parent-adult, but then there are all these mentoring one-on-one relationships that are taking place with kids and adults who someone lives here and someone can live in another country. And oftentimes age doesn't matter. So if you think about someone using Facebook or MySpace, you wouldn't necessarily want an adult and kid interaction. But if you're thinking about, I'm going online to learn chess per se, or I'm going online to learn how to do music videos or something like that, then you might want an adult in interaction with kids. So I think there's a range of different relationships that exist between adults and kids in these new spaces.
And there's a piece too, a role for adults that's very powerful that has actually less to do with the media itself than what it is that anyone is trying to do with the media. For example, in writing, the same thing is true pre-digital media. It's what you're using the writing to accomplish in the world. It's the work you're trying to do in the world. And so if you are, in fact, trying to do something that is a project of civic engagement, well, in fact, you need a network of people with many different backgrounds and experience for the project of civic engagement. Whether, in fact, their specialty is the media or not is not necessarily the issue. The issue might be the larger social purpose that we're using any of these tools to do and to accomplish.
There's a question in the back.
Yeah, just to follow up on this notion. My name is Pat Selenium. I'm a writing project teacher from. My name is Pat Selenium. I'm a writing project teacher from San Francisco, and also a librarian in a public school. And one of the sort of projects of civic education that we are talking around a lot during the day today and here tonight is this whole issue of filtering in schools and the strenuous, needlessly strenuous filtering that's going on with SIPA in schools. So what you guys are presenting up there, it's really interesting the number of projects that are happening outside of school settings. One of the reasons they're happening just outside of school settings is because teachers, like parents, are infantilized by this ridiculous, over-censorious attitude that IT departments have throughout the country. So what I want to ask you as representatives, as representatives of very powerful, I mean, you guys are a powerful network now. We don't have to have you created. Where's the MacArthur Foundation? Where's the National Writing Project? Where are these schools of higher education on pushing the envelope on SIPA filtering? That's what I want to know.
Well, before jumping on the SIPA filtering as a federal policy, I want Nichole to say a little bit about her success in implementing one-to-one and actually having a different approach.
So I must first couch this by saying we work in charter schools, but that's important to note. But we work in charter schools that are designed to serve as a model for Chicago public schools, and what we've done is our use of bringing in technology and demonstrating how kids in urban areas can use this responsibly is serve as a model where Chicago public school technology directors have come in and even implemented some of the things that we've implemented, and we've been in conversations with them now about how to use even the out of school spaces as learning spaces to support what's going on in the school day. So I think one of the things is showing, one of the important things is showing that you can relax constraints and kids can act responsibly and the sky doesn't fall down. And I think once you have more examples of that, then I think it's easier to have the dialogue. So we're in the process of that dialogue in Chicago. I can't tell you how it's going to turn out, but I do know there have been some of the resources that we use that they've implemented that have caused them to expand their, to decrease some of their constraints.
I'll tell you a very funny story about filtering, which will illustrate my strange ambivalence toward it. When we were working on the curriculum materials for the Frontline show, Growing Up Online, many of you may have seen that. It aired on public broadcasting a few years ago. One of the activities that we designed was where high school students would essentially debate the pros and cons of filtering in high schools. We thought this is a great opportunity for high school students to have a robust debate about the pros and cons of filtering in high schools. And when we tried it out, as we often do, we educators, we pilot in our own children's schools. I went into my daughter's high school, and there was absolutely zero traction for this. And I wondered, why did this lesson not work? Until my daughter over dinner table said, "Mom, If there were no filters in my high school, I'd be on Facebook all day. I would never be able to exercise self-control. I know myself. I can't do it. Thank God there's filters in schools because I can get my homework done. And I was stunned because I've been raising a media literate daughter since she was this big. And so I want to appreciate that right now we have a situation where the average high school teacher has 120 kids a day. Right? And that's a lot of people to watch. And that's a lot of, there's a lot of ways where what happens can be really complicated and messy. So I actually think the filtering thing, one of the things I think we need to move in the direction of, and the law lets us do it, is communities determine for themselves where to put up the filters, how loose or how strict they should be. We don't rely on anybody else to tell us what comes in and out. We make those judgments for ourselves. So I think teachers have to be vital advocates for saying, look, we need to be able to use social networking tools for teaching and learning, and the filters have to let us do that. So, but I do think communities, as communities determine those standards for themselves, that's an opportunity for dialogue within the community. There's no right way to do this. Each community has to figure it out for themselves.
So, so what we did in not using, it was important for us that kids develop their own habits around how to protect themselves in some sense on how to use the internet. And so we didn't put filters, but we monitored use. And so if you had a peer-to-peer program on your sharing, then we would come in the classroom and re-image your laptop in front of everyone. You lost all your music. So we made violations of internet policies that all kids signed as violations of student policies, and we treated them in the same way because it was important, because for us they were taking the computers home, and so if we filtered them at school, then they're going home, and particularly in our environments, there might not have been anyone there to put in to help them develop the healthy habits. So we still, I believe that we have developed students who know how to monitor. Now, of course, there are problems. And one of our teachers is sitting here, what she always talks about is the importance of, if you know, the same way we would pass notes. If you have good teaching going on, then you can limit some of the things that take place. But we do believe our kids have better habits around how to monitor themselves and the use of technology.
I want to go to a question over here.
Hi. I'm really excited about...
Can you say your name and...
Yeah, sorry. My name's Jenna McWilliams, and I'm a graduate student at Indiana University. So I'm really excited about these projects because they point to, I think, a key feature of kind of this idea of universal authorship, which is that you can turn the camera onto your community and kind of record what's happening and in your community. And I think that one potential side effect of that is an intense amount of anger, potentially. And it sounds like these communities, Philadelphia and Chicago, have support for doing something productive with that anger. But I'm wondering if you guys have any thoughts on ways to channel or work with or guide students as they're becoming authors, becoming more aware of the things that are happening in their own communities.
I think it's a really great question. It turns out when we give teenagers really the opportunity to express themselves, they always say things that make us uncomfortable. That's their function in a society. So in some ways, you've identified one of the most robust and challenging issues around good curriculum design for working with adolescents around this topic. It's not a situation we've solved.
But I think what I hear you saying is, so if I'm a kid growing up on the south side of Chicago in a community that's disenfranchised and has been, and you give me a camera to go document that, well, what I'm going to constantly document is showing how I'm disenfranchised. And how does that empower me to make a difference or to change, or is that just empower me to tell the same old story? So I think what we were very conscious of, and it's probably a couple of years ago, where we decided the final product couldn't be the creation of the media. That is a step along the way. But how am I using this to bring about a dialogue or to bring about some change? And so what we've done in our work in the Chicago Public Library is we have contests, and we put in place opportunities for kids to demonstrate and share their work with those who are in power, and to engage in a dialogue to see if things can happen. So we've had some experiences lately where kids have created, media that say, here's how it would change my particular neighborhood, and then the kids have talked to the mayor and gotten the land and actually to change their neighborhood. So I think a lot of it is in the activity structures where the purpose of the media isn't just to create it, but it's to create it for what purpose, for what audience, and what are the conversations that you create around it.
Yeah, I think that's really vital, because I think it's a perfect example of something which is actually not caused by digital media. It's about the participation structures in society that the media fit within. And so much of what we need to think about in terms of curriculum, in terms of making meaningful opportunities to participate socially, not simply to participate digitally, but to participate socially through digital means. If we could structure that, if we could break some of those silos down that keep young people away from old people, from working people, that silo people in all these different places so that, in fact, they can't interact as a community, the digital tools would find their place within that. Similarly, I'm thinking of the issues around filtering. Institutions are deeply siloed. So, in fact, administrators and teachers and parents and young people are rarely brought into a kind of thoughtful dialogue that treats everybody as potentially a serious enough participant in a decision that actually they need to rise to their best self. And I know a lot of folks in the room work with young people as teachers or out of school mentors or in a range of places, or with your own students or with your own young people in your family, and you've probably seen that actually the more seriously you take their participation, the more they rise to the seriousness of purpose. And so, in fact, if we can use this moment to treat everyone more deeply as a participant, sure, there will be problems, and in fact, all the regular hijinks will ensue. But people will rise. It's sort of an article of faith, I think. We just have to take that on.
We have a question down here in front.
Hello, my name is Miss Mirvac, and I've been teaching digital media production in New Foundations Charter School in Northeast Philadelphia for about 5 to 6 years now. I have taught pre-camp to high school about video production, lighting, photography, and we really try to base it on service learning and community service. So my question is, what are the boundaries that the students can express themselves? Because we've done swine flu PSA, we do internet safety, we do social emotional skills, we do educational skills as study guides, we do the whole bit. Everything that is the education we try to produce in a video. And we also have, every quarter, we have a semester of video production where the whole 6th, 7th, and 8th graders have to do a video project. So there is a lot of different type of expression and a lot of different type of kids, and like you said, some kids might be from the South Side. So the question is, what are the limits and boundaries of like mannerisms that we can show in video production? Because there are different kids that have different etiquette and speech. Like, where do we draw the line as the instructor to allow them to express themselves?
One of the things I'm reading between the lines, but you know, our kids are still watching 35 hours a week of television. Right. They're watching movies. They're playing M-rated video games. Right. They're living in a hyper-mediated world of mass media and popular culture that has a whole set of values right. about violence and sexuality right. that make it very complicated for you, because kids want to enact those values because our culture has taught them that's what
is okay.
That's what gets you success.
But in an educational place, that is not.
Well, I think, and actually, Renee is using some of your work. I think when you, so there's teaching kids technically how to do something, and
right.
then there's teaching them responsibility.
Right.
And so we always start our work with the critical aspect.
Right.
And we don't tell kids no, but what we tell them is you have to stand up and defend your work in front of your peers.
Right.
So if you want to put together a video that includes some of the stuff that you're talking about, and you feel that you want to stand up in front and justify that, then go ahead. Right. And they don't do it. And so, you know,
like, is that a
now I'm not going to tell you, I'm not going to say that they don't do it at home using their laptop, but they don't do it in the confines of there. And so so I think that has worked much better for us than saying, here's a list of no rules.
Right.
Because at that point, when they have to own it, I think they take more responsibility for that.
Because as an instructor, I just don't want to get in trouble by my boss, like, oh, well, that kid made a scene that is not school appropriate, but that is their lives. That's what they're expressing. That's what they are.
Okay.
You know, so it's hard to differentiate that.
Thanks. We have time for just a couple more questions. Rick, let me know if there are any questions that you want to send in. Barry has a question in the back, and then there's another question over here on the side.
Barry Joseph, Global Kids. This is a really important conversation. Thank you. Part of what I'm hearing is that there's really significant learning that young people are getting outside of schools using digital media, and that's learning that's crucial for their success in their lives in the 21st century, and not necessarily showing up in their transcript in schools. So if learning is expanding outside of schools, what responsibilities do we have to figure out more formal ways for parents and for learning institutions to be able to help others understand what they're learning and support the young people to be able to better articulate what these skills are and why they're important in our current digital age?
That's a great question. And I would just add to that, that actually a lot of what young people are learning in schools isn't showing up in their transcripts either. So it's actually a problem of the transcripts, and just have to say. So I think there are a couple things that intersect. Actually, people refer to things like portfolios, exhibitions, new ways for us to think about how it is that we can demonstrate accomplishment to each other. And that accomplishment can be, in fact, accomplished in a whole range of places. And we need to actually be able to think about that. And that is an important conversation at this moment. There is a fair amount of policy work going on right now to think about what should be standards and should there be new standards. There's a thing called the Common Core Standards Project with a range of states working together to perhaps identify a new set of standards again in school that might link to a range of new assessments. That could narrow the field, it could expand the field, it could exacerbate this problem, it could in fact help support this problem. So the notion of, especially with such low barriers to participation, how in fact we do conduct the business of society to be able to, especially in school contexts and elsewhere, do the things we've laid on schools around accountability, et cetera. How do we work in that world? It's an important thing for adults to be thinking about now, and not just for the teachers to figure out how to do it, but to have, in fact, the entire policy environment and the public start to really take seriously this question that the performances we have been asking for on tests are not the performances, in fact, that we would hope necessarily that well-accomplished kids can do in their lives. And we have to take that up as a society.
And in addition, I think we're now in a place where technology can facilitate the sharing of learning or examples of learning from one place to the other. I mean, now you can have everything lives in the cloud now. So I can do work in the library, or do work in the after-school space, and easily with a click make it accessible in school. So I think we can revisit some of the questions or some of the ideas we've always had about integrating learning, because now I think we can create the technological links that can bridge all these different spaces together.
Fittingly, our last question is going to come from the web. Rick, do we have a question either from the webcast or from Second Life?
Sure. This is Rick from Global Kids, not the voice of God. We've had a very lively conversation both within Second Life and, which way? Sorry. Both in Second Life, and we've gotten some submissions from the web. First of all, No Clue Kid, who is a middle school teacher in New Jersey, wants to know, with all of the talk of 21st century learning, why do you think educators are so slow to understand the critical part of multimedia plays in learning design? How do we get educators to move beyond seeing multimedia as only a special project or club? Schools rush to equip every classroom with $2,000 interactive whiteboards. The same money could be spent on cameras, laptops, and editing software for every student. Now that would be truly transformative. The second comment is from a question from Dominic Raymond, who's for the Pennsylvania Department of Education in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. State and federal policymakers are currently working on aligning and integrating digital media and learning with state and nationally developed standards, curricular and assessments, i.e. Common Core, PBS Digital Learning Library, etc. How are you ensuring best practices from your programs are part of these critical conversations?
Thanks. Why don't we tackle those two and
Well,
Break this
I'll just pony up. The youth media community is, by and large, struggling for survival. Raise your hand if you are in a youth media program that you can't talk to policymakers. You can barely manage the next quarter. Look. All right? We can't participate in policy discussions until we have a stable, well-funded organizations that can grow a leadership community. But it's hard for me to recommend, and I do recommend to my graduate students and to my undergraduate students, invest in this field. This field is growing. But right now, there's not much of a leadership ladder. And until that leadership ladder emerges, we can't participate in these kinds of discourses. And so I think we have a lot of work to do.
I think one of the things that's possible is collaborations around bringing in research partnerships so that it's hard if you're in the middle of running one of these programs to stop, drop, and reflect. But if you have, but if you have a partner who's there, whose responsibility it is to be documenting what's going on, it could be a graduate student, it's their dissertation, that becomes valuable data for you to use. And then also it tells the story, and it can be more than just qualitative, it can be quantitative. So for the past 3 years with MacArthur Support, we had colleagues who were documenting our work. And so we had the qualitative and the quantitative. And unfortunately, it's going to take those types of data sets beyond just R1, but in larger. So, I mean, really the Philadelphia Collaborative, Youth Media Collaborative, it would be to be able to bring someone or someone's in to sort of begin to document what's taking place there. So then that data can be used for the policy, because until you have the data sets, then our work isn't going to be taken serious to say this should be put into, to be put really into the standards.
Yeah, I think actually MacArthur is a good example of this, and we need more of it. There is such a thing that people have called top-down support for bottom-up change, which is a way of saying that people on the ground who are in fact inventing and understanding and developing best practices because they're actually doing the work in a context with a range of people, and from that learning and developing it, they need top-down support for that bottom-up work. And so there's a role actually for folks at the top to not themselves feel that their goal is to go make a decision and solve a problem, but to actually solve the problem of how to break apart those silos and bring a range of people into the table. So it's a difference between deciding, let's go make some standards, and deciding how do we network the right group of people to be in conversation about the standards. They're a slightly different way to operate at the top. And then there's a responsibility at the bottom, too, to be able to be prepared, educated network to be able to respond to the invitations when they're there. So more of those sorts of working partnerships around policy are probably needed to address some of the things that those questions pointed to. I think MacArthur is trying to do that, and I think others would try to do that if we could name that as an important thing to do. We don't always do that. We don't always make a place for that kind of work. It's almost the invisible work of relationship building, field building. It's not quite as flashy as issuing a report. We've got to name it and make it visible as really important work.
And I think as we continue this work, we have to continue to have public discussions like this. I want to thank you all for your participation tonight. I think this has been a terrific discussion. And before we leave, I want to give a special thanks to the organizations that organized and made this event possible, to the National Writing Project, the Woodrow Wilson National Fellowship Foundation, the Academy of Natural Sciences, and the Global Kids. And I especially want to thank our panelists. Thank you for a wonderful discussion. Have a good night, everyone.